Mr.
Dan Schultz, present.
Ms. Henry,
Present.
Ms. Haywood,
Present.
Mr. X,
Present.
Ms. Mulder,
Present.
Mr. Cohen,
Present.
Mr. Cordell Williams,
Present.
and Mr. Fishbein is not able to join us this evening. Do you have a motion to approve the minutes from the January 17, 2023 Educational Affairs Committee meeting?
No.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Smith and her team for a presentation about the district's autistic support services and an update on the transition from the MCIU run classes to district run classes.
So thank you everyone for joining us on a Wednesday. This is not our typical meeting night, so thank you for being flexible and making the change. I am not going to take much time, but to say that our Office of Special Education did a great job pulling together this presentation. This was done and coordinated prior to the introduction of our interim Director of Special Education, Mr. Evans. So I definitely want to thank all of our supervisors for holding it down and to making sure that tonight's presentation was still planned, even though we did not have a full-time director at the time. But Mr. Evans is here and he has jumped in and really been a very meaningful and contributive member of the team during his short stay. And with that, I am going to turn everything over to our special education supervisors. We have several speakers tonight, and they're all going to speak directly in their areas of expertise.
Great. So hi, everyone. We begin our presentation just like any other presentation to the board with the mission and vision statement of the district.
I'm just going to interrupt you. Are you going to introduce yourself?
Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. I'm Catherine DeJohn Vittorio. I'm one of the supervisors of special education. I oversee the return to district NCIU autistic support classes, as well as all of the programs at EP, the 5-6 building. And we're going to be like alternating between us with the presentation. So,
Thank you.
no problem. So to start, we're going to briefly go through an introduction of autism, overseeing definition of autism, as well as what autistic support might look like. We're going to review information and updates about the opening of the autistic support classrooms through district run, give information and demographics from the elementary as well as the secondary level, and speaking to out of district placements as well, and then opportunities for questions as well as information with the graphs that you'll see throughout the presentation in the appendix, so that you can get numerical data. Okay.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tracy Lang. I am the supervisor of special education for the K-4. And so we're going to talk about autism and the definition of autism. So autism is a developmental disability that really focuses on significant social, communication, and behavioral challenges. And some examples of a child with autism is repetitive behaviors, avoid or does not keep eye contact, may not show facial expressions, and does not notice when others have others' feelings. That's just to name a very, very small. Some of the other characteristics we're going to talk about is visual support. Let's see. Jacqueline, can you switch to the next slide? One of the ways that we support children with autism is through visual supports. So the use of visual supports are included throughout the school and classroom environment. Here are some examples that we use throughout the elementary. You'll see in a classroom, classroom expectations, and here are some of them. Use walking feet, use kind words, raise your hand, listen to your teacher's peers, safe, quiet, hands, feet, and body. Very often in the classrooms, individuals will have the same visual supports, on their desk or on their communication system or whatever they're using, moving around the school building. They also have the visual supports with them at all times. On the right-hand side, you'll see some other ways with visual supports, for some simple communication, when they can indicate if they're ready to work, basic needs. Now we're going to talk about some of the statistics of students with autism in the Cheltenham School District. So if you look over to the left side, you see the gender statistics for K-12 of students with a primary diagnosis of autism. So for females, there is a number of 26, and for males, there is a number of 102. The numbers can be found in the appendix at the bottom of the presentation. In the middle graph, you'll see the gender with the gender statistics for K-12 for students with autism as a secondary diagnosis. For females, the number is 6, and for males, the number is 22.
Excuse me, what does it mean for them to have a secondary diagnosis?
So they have a primary of something else.
Okay.
So it could be any other.
Okay.
On the far right-hand side, we have the statistics broken up by racial categories. So you'll see the numbers for that for students that are diagnosed with autism. There are 6 under the category of Asian, 104 under the category of Black or African American. There are 9 under the category of Hispanic, 7 multiracial, 1 Native American or other Pacific Islanders, and 29 white or Caucasian. And then we also broke down the disability category from K to 6. So I actually have it broken down by school, so I can tell you by school. So Cheltenham has a primary exceptionality of 13. GE has 5. Myers has 13. Wyncote has 21, and Elkins Park has 24.
Did you want to?
I'm sorry. On the far right-hand side, you can see we broke down the statistics by what type of support those students are receiving. At Cheltenham Elementary, there are 2 in the emotional support, 11 in the learning support, and 2 receiving autistic support. In Glenside, there is 1 in autistic support, 3 in learning support, and 3 in life skills. At Myers, there is 11 in autistic support, 4 in learning support. At Wyncote, there are 14 in autistic support, 1 in emotional support, and 6 receiving learning support. In Elkins Park, there are 7 receiving autistic support, 1 receiving emotional support, and 22 receiving learning support. Basically, what is autistic support? When you're thinking of how to support an autistic child, you're really focusing on the primary areas of communication, social skills, and behaviors, and devising a plan to help support those needs.
So on the side, you'll see examples of related services that the students could receive. They're identified through an evaluation process for the needs, and then it is included in their individualized special education program for what services they receive and what skills and goals they're working on. So speaking on the transition back to district, there have been a lot of opportunities for growth. We recognize that this was a transition and this is the first year, a couple months in. So we're continuing our growth as a program. But prior to the school year starting, there are opportunities for families to join virtual and in-person meet and greets with the teachers, with the school staff, the principals, as well as opportunities for building tours. Some of the challenges we've recognized with the programming is staffing concerns. There's difficulty staffing across the nation, really. So that's something we recognize as a challenge. For successes, we've recognized, and this is something we'll talk about in a later slide, an increase in inclusion in the Cheltenham community and opportunities to be included in the general education setting, as well as the ability to really individualize the student supports so that it's really addressing their needs in that area. Things that continue to happen throughout the year and have been happening so far are weekly supports between myself and Dr. Brown Beasley, the board certified behavior analyst, with one of them with the district. We have opportunities to walk through the classrooms, supporting staff, reviewing resources, as well as Dr. Brown Beasley having opportunities to do fidelity check, observations, behavior skill training, coaching and feedback. So it's a constant growing model, and that's the goal, is to continue to support these students as we identify their needs, new needs, old needs. So for professional development opportunities, there have been many opportunities throughout the school year for all different staff who work with our students on the spectrum to be able to continue to develop their skills. We've had chances for our paraprofessionals to engage in opportunities for identifying autism spectrum disorder and their characteristics, foundations of ABA, behavior and de-escalation strategies, and then data collection, which is very important in determining students' plans. And same with teachers, they had opportunities to be involved in professional development for different areas across to support our students on the spectrum. Then also monthly, we have meetings with the AS team. So all members who are involved in the team, so related service specialists, teachers, principals, are all invited to meetings monthly to join, and we get to talk about questions for the program, student-specific questions, because they're all specifically teamed by teachers. So each teacher who's in the Return to District program has this opportunity to be in this monthly meeting. And then we have, like I said, weekly times that Dr. B and I both designate being in the buildings. We're present in the program, and that's the big on helping the growth, is being able to see firsthand where our strengths are, where our needs are, so that we can continue to plan and build on it. So by a breakdown for the schools for the return programs, at Myers, we have two district-run classes, and the teachers' names are present. Same with Wyncote Elementary, we have 2 district-run classes. There's 1 class run at Elkins Park, 1 class run at Cedar Brook Middle School, and then 1 class that is combined. It's collaborative effort with the Skills for Life program at the high school. And then with the program, Dr. Ryan Brown Beasley works very closely with this program. She supports students across the district on the spectrum, but then additionally works very closely with this program in the classes. And then I, as the supervisor, am also involved in even weekly just times in the classroom. So similar to the statistics that Dr. Lank had shared before, this is the number of students that return to our district programs from the MCIU program. We have 11 students at Myers, 12 at Wyncote, 7 at Elkins Park, 6 at Cedar Brook, and 7 at high school. So a total of 43 students have returned to the Cheltenham community and being involved in our district more closely. In this slide, we talk a little bit about the least restrictive environment, which is opportunities for the students to engage in the general education setting with their general education peers. So if you take a look, the blue bars mark the 2021 and 2022 school year. So that was when the classes were run by the IU. And the orange bars mark the 22-23 school year, which is when it came back to district. So there's been an increase in opportunities for inclusion for students as we've been able to recognize their needs and really programs on such an individual level to being able to make sure all their needs are met appropriately.
Just to clarify, to make sure I understand this graph, what is the x-axis? Is that number of students?
Yes, x-axis is number of students, and y-axis is the percent of LRE. So the minutes are determined by it. The percent comes from minutes spent in the general education setting out of total minutes of the day.
So in theory, if somebody was at 100%, that would mean they're spending all of their time in the general education classroom. And
Correct.
if it was 0%, they would
They'd be spent, it's a full, yep.
Okay,
You
thank you.
got it. So kind of show what that looks like in real life. We grabbed some sample schedules from students across the district in these return classes to see what does their schedule look like and where the location of these classes occurring. So you recognize we have students who, we said, have different programming. They have opportunities in the general education classroom as well as receiving supports in the autistic support classroom. But additionally, we also have students receiving services in certain areas, like for instance, a sample of a 4th grade male receiving his ALI support and learning support. So we have this opportunity then for really being involved and making sure those needs are individualized and met in the appropriate area. So this slide, as well as this next slide, show just different varying schedules from the elementary level up through 8th grade. When looking at the classrooms themselves, a little bit what I've talked about before. So prior to when the MCIU was running the program, there were 2 AS classrooms and case managers with the IU at Myers. And this year, there are 2 autistic support supplemental full-time classrooms in Myers school. Same with Wyncote, there were 2 classes, which then also correlated to 2 classes as well. And then at EP, there were 2 classes with the IU. And this year, the programming occurs in one classroom in Elkins Park. This chart breaks down whom the teacher is for the program, their student numbers, as well as curriculum pieces that we're utilizing within the classroom. We use research-driven curriculums in order to support those students' varying needs, academic needs, behavior, social communication needs. So goals. So like I said, we are a couple months into the transition from the IU program. So there's going to continue to be growth, and that's the hope, is to continue to mold the program to meet the needs of the students that we have in front of us, as well as really build the strength of the program so that we can continue to support these students in the district with the staff and with the supports we have in place. So in hopes for future goals, we want to increase opportunities for blended programming. So like I said, if a student needs fit appropriately in learning support for a certain academic, then that's where they're going to receive it. And that's the goal, is that coming back was building that level of bridging that maybe distance from the IU classes to now being within the district. Increasing student community involvement. So you'll see some slides which show some pictures of the students being involved in these community programming that occurs in the school because they are members of the Cheltenham community. And that's something that was really great with bringing the program back, is this unity, and we are a community. And so they have these opportunities to join in on the PBIS events, on the different presentations that maybe principals give, different programming that the school offers. They really feel that blendedness now being back with district staff. And then also increasing opportunities for students to work on adaptive and life skills. We recognize autism is a spectrum, so students have varying needs, and really just making sure we really plan and continue to grow in meeting all of those needs in all of those areas that autism can show as characteristics with a child. Did you want to talk about?
Sure. So we just kind of, to piggyback off what Jacqueline was saying about blended programming, this is just an example of children receiving different types of supports. This specific picture is students in Cheltenham Elementary, and you can see on the left side a child is using his visual schedule to help with the schedule for the day, and then the children on the right are doing a social emotional learning curriculum.
So this picture also reinforces that students have opportunities built in their day to engage in various social emotional opportunities, which includes different programming and different ways to just continue to develop those skills in those need areas, social skills, behavior. The next slide kind of reinforces that portion of autism and the characteristics is utilizing those visuals. Visuals are huge. So staff are utilizing both on an individual level as well as classroom level. So students have that ability to utilize for themselves, but also see it as a community base in whole class. Same with students built in their schedule is time to work on individual goals and skill work. So a strong strategy to use in classroom is having what's called task boxes. And so these are opportunities for kids to work a little bit more independently, but on skills that are individualized to their IEP or to their needs.
So in this slide, I just wanted to give some examples of some of the other opportunities at the different schools. So you'll see in that center picture, that is actually the sensory hallway at Cheltenham Elementary, where children can go if they are feeling overwhelmed or just need a break. They can go through the sensory hallway. There are instructions for them. You can do push-ups, or you can just hop on the frog pad, lily pads. You can count. You can do. There's a whole host of activities for children to do to help with their sensory processing. And then on the far right side, that is at Wyncote Elementary. They actually have 2 hallways for their sensory hallways. And you can see right there, if a child is feeling, where they need to take a minute, they can go in there and they can relax a little bit. They do bean bags. They also have opportunities with sensory. There are things on the wall to help with different tactile. And then you'll see again on the child on the left. Again, she's doing her schedule. And you'll see she has headphones on because that's what she needs in that moment. So she's provided with headphones. Again, it doesn't make a difference the type of support that we're receiving. We look at the individual and what their individual needs are. So again, this is just some examples of the sensory hallways at the different elementary schools that don't necessarily have the autistic support programs, but provide support for children, for the autistic children.
Great. My name is Allison Googler. I'm the supervisor of special education for the secondary schools. I'm going to take you through some slides that talk about our students with autism and our autistic support services at the secondary level. This first slide is similar to the slide you saw for elementary, where it breaks down the students from 7 to 12, and 12 includes to age 21. We don't have 13, 14, 15th grade, but 21 years old in some cases. So for context, at Cedar Brook, we have 24 students who either have a primary disability category of autism or a secondary. And at the high school, we have 46 students who have either a primary or secondary of autism. The second pie chart breaks down the programming. So students don't have to receive the same type of programming that matches their disability. What we provide to them is based on what they show us that they need. So of all of our students at secondary, some of them have an IEP that reflects primarily autistic support because their needs are in the areas of social behavior and communication. That is like the widespread theme of their supports and services that they need. But we also have a good handful of students whose needs are primarily academic. And so those students may have a primary of learning support, but we still embed social behavior and communication supports into their IEP. Then we have a few students whose primary need is life skill support. So that's that functional development of skills targeting independence later in life, but also social behavior and communication because of the disability of autism. And then a few students whose primary is emotional support type of support. So those students may have more behavioral regulation kinds of needs in addition to their social behavior and communication needs.
Excuse me. I know we typically wait until the end of the presentation, but thank you for some of that context. I would like to get a little bit more and understanding the different levels of support, what that means.
Sure. The Pennsylvania School Code, so Chapter 14 of the Pennsylvania School Code is what breaks down the different types of supports. And so for these and a few others, speech and language support, physical support, multiple disability support, they give us specific definitions of how you determine that that's at the end of the IEP. And when we sit as an IEP team, we go through all the different sections of the IEP, and this is the end. This is the very last page. And so we have to decide, okay, we put together all these present levels, all these goals, all this specially designed instruction. What does that reflect for our student? Because we don't want to just say, well, you have autism, so autistic support is what you got. You know, we want to be really thoughtful about that. So we can provide links if they're not in there to that, just those descriptions too. Okay, so what I think is really important here to highlight for the secondary level is the increase that we did just with our teachers that we had within our buildings already. So at Cedar Brook last year, we had one autistic support teacher, one classroom, and that person worked for the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit. Same as at the high school, we had one autistic support classroom and case manager. That person worked for the MCIU. But all these students that I mentioned to you, 70 something students, they were in our buildings already. And so we wanted to figure out how can we maximize the use of our staff that we currently have to better meet the needs of our students who exist here. Our teachers were working so hard. We had 10 special education teachers at Cedar Brook and 20 at the high school. They were working so hard, they were doing everything that their students needed, but the students were kind of sprinkled throughout across their caseloads. And so what we decided to do was look at the total numbers and determine, do we need some more just autistic support case managers so we can use their knowledge and expertise and build upon it by working with me in smaller groups or one-on-one to further embrace and support our students. So at Cedar Brook this year, we have our one autistic support supplemental and full-time classroom. Those are our students who we opened a classroom for who were previously served by the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit. But then we also took one of our Cedar Brook teachers and said, your caseload is going to be all students with autism who require autistic support as a primary or secondary. And in your classroom, we're going to do things specific for those students. Again, just a Cedar Brook teacher that we had already, but we really wanted to make that teacher an expert in supporting those students. We did a similar thing at the high school. We opened a classroom, as Jacqueline mentioned, and we combined that with our Skills for Life. You'll see some slides that talk about that. But then we also said, well, we actually have 20 some kids with autism that need another home base. So Ms. Taylor, who's here today, I'll call her out since she's here this evening, she became an autistic support case manager. And then we also have Mr. Eckhart, who is our department chair at the high school, and another teacher and a half who manage some of the additional needs of our students with autism. And so I meet with them separately. And Ms. Taylor and I actually are piloting some services that you'll see we'll talk about in a little bit. So we meet a little more frequently. I can participate in all of those IEP meetings now, and it's not, our kids have a person. They have a person who they're going to be with for the next, 4 years or more if they require more time with us. And so we can just continue to build the expertise of our teachers and also build the comfort for our students. It's hard to work on social and behavior and communication with so many changes as time goes on. So that's what we did just with our existing staff that we had. In particular, more details for Cedar Brook, we have Dr. Houston, who Jacqueline mentioned earlier. She teaches the classes that are listed below, along with those curricular materials. These are the core curricular materials. We do allow all of our teachers to supplement to some extent if they need something else, but these are the core materials that we use. And then we have Mrs. Hammond. So she is our additional teacher who was a Cedar Brook teacher, who we reformed her responsibilities. So there are 15 students that she works with, and you'll see the little star. They're not with her for the vast majority of the day. That's in the presentation, but I'm saying it to you right now. So she has 4 sections of an academic social skills class that she teaches every other day for half of the encore period. The encore periods at Cedar Brook are 80 minutes. So for half of the encore period, the students will come and they'll work in groups on various social skills. She also teaches a reading class. Something we identified last year at Cedar Brook was that we had a few students who had autism who learned to read and especially comprehend when it comes to character interactions and things like that, all of those social kinds of things you would think about with reading, but they really had different needs that they needed met in a special kind of way. So Mrs. Hammond actually teaches that small group reading with a specific program that has shown evidence that it's effective for working, increasing the reading skills of students with autism. So she teaches them, and those are the materials that she uses there. These are just some examples. We have some pictures of Mrs. Houston's class. Jacqueline and I actually share responsibilities of Dr. Houston's class. I'm sorry, I said that again. We share responsibilities in Dr. Houston's class because of some of our overlap that we want to see in that class. You'll see that in our goals. And then Mrs. Hammond's here on the right, facilitating one of her social skills groups. And this is a slide of some students in Dr. Houston's room working on, they were sewing pillowcases for one of our MLK days of service for children. Okay, so our future goals for Cedar Brook, we are really looking to develop some cross support between our autistic support class as Dr. Houston's class and our life skills support class, who is Mrs. Kaplan's class, because we want for those students who do need to be in a specialized special education classroom for half or more of their day, we do want them to still have, as typical of a middle school experience as they can. And so we actually just today in our department meeting, we're talking about how we can move the reading mastery instruction from this year into next year with our students coming up who are using that program and our students now who are using it. And Mrs. Kaplan and Dr. Houston will teach sections of that class. And so we'll be able to group our students together based on their instructional level, and they'll change classes just like all of the other kids in our middle school. And so we think that that's really important to provide as much of a typical middle school experience as we can. We are also looking to use the model that I'll get into in a minute that Mrs. Taylor piloted this year at the high school, so that our students do not need to go miss half of an encore every other day for their social skills instruction. We want to be a little more creative and flexible about how we do that. Mrs. Taylor piloted that at the high school, and it's worked really well. I'll give you some more details about that in a minute. And so we're going to expand that into Cedar Brook. So we're excited about that. Okay, at the high school, specific to autistic support, we have Dr. Ryan, who is an autistic support teacher. She runs the classroom, or the home base, I should say, for the students who previously had been educated in the MCIU classroom. However, we actually also had 2 move-in students who came to join us this year who were perfectly appropriate for Dr. Ryan, and a student who returned back to us from an out-of-district placement. So that was really nice. It's a really nice new group of students. As mentioned before, this is part of the larger Skills for Life program that Mr. Cohen and Mrs. Yalman's run. I'm sure you have heard and seen some things that they've done in the past. And so I oversee that program just because they're embedded together. And then Mrs. Taylor's office. She doesn't even have a classroom, which we think is a good thing. We don't want there to be a place where you have to go if you're a student with autism. She has an office. You know, there's not a classroom that you have to be in. We really want it to be fluid and open. So she sees 20 students for social skills instruction, but she sees them throughout their week. I have to really commend her for the creativity and flexibility she's done with scheduling, because you know, we have the block schedule at the high school. You know, we have a blue day and a gold day. And so Monday, Wednesday, Friday, one week might be blue, but the next week it's Tuesday, Thursday. So Mrs. Taylor can almost never see the same kids on the same day at the same time. And somehow she manages all of those schedules and communicates to the kids and the families about when she's going to see them. And then she had to do it again because the second semester everything changes. So she's done a really, really nice job. And we find that the kids are actually really flourishing that way, as opposed to having to go to a seminar class every other day for 84 minutes. They can instead get this embedded support. We built a flexible support period into her day. So if she needs to push into a class and support that way instead, like let's say a student with autism is kind of struggling with group work or something like that, which would be kind of typical. She might push into that class where there's group work happening instead of pulling that child out for social skills instruction that day and meet their needs that way instead. And those are the 2 main programs that we use for the social skills instruction, skill streaming, and then the social skills work.
I'm gonna just jump back to HF. Is that high functioning?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, and then because we keep mentioning the Skills for Life program, I just wanted to give you one quick slide to highlight that Skills for Life program that we have. We have 27 total students who receive at least 50% of their instruction in that classroom. There are 3 teachers, Dr. Ryan and the other 2 teachers who I mentioned. We have 3 classrooms set up for this program, and then one has the kitchen area and the washer dryer machine and things like that. Friday is actually our return of the Unified Coffee Company working with Whitson. So we're really excited about that. We have 4 paraprofessionals who support those 3 classrooms, and then 3 paraprofessionals who provide one-to-one services for our students. The 5 classes that we teach in those classrooms are functional math, functional reading, independent living, social skills, and morning meeting. We have multiple sections of those classes depending on student schedules. You know, some of our kids go out for work for half of the day or half of the week. And so we want to make sure that we can still provide enough sections. So our teachers teach typically multiple sections of that. The average amount of time, according to the IEPs, that the students spend in the gen ed environment, if they're in that program, is 36% of their day. And some of the resources we use, Conover Resources, which is online, that's a comprehensive academic and social skills and emotional behavioral regulation. And then we use the News to Use suite of programs, which is Unique Learning System. We use that throughout a lot of our classrooms, K-12. And I wanted to highlight for you, although, you know, transition is a 14 and up kind of service that we have to provide and think about for all of our students, I did want to provide you just a couple of stories for 2 of our students. So student 1 is a student whose transition plan includes career training, supported employment, and living at home. We have to address 3 areas: post-secondary, employment, and independent living. So that student's goals are those 3 things. That student participates in the Skills for Life program, but they also joined, when they started working on their transition goals, the MCIU PAYS Lab, which is you will go for a portion of your day and you do practical, like if you remember the job boxes in a couple slides ago, you're doing more comprehensive work like that to sort of practice some basic employment skills and also get an idea of what you might like to do. So that student started with the MCIU PAYS Lab 1 year. They moved to the MCIU Transition Service Experience, which is something that we can do with a little more time with the MCIU, and the students may expand beyond the PAYS Lab room to work and provide some employment practice within the MCIU buildings. The next step of that is the transition service employment. Now, we never guarantee paid employment, but we do, the MCIU does have a lot of partnerships with employers in the area. And so they are very good to work with us and our other local districts to provide vocational practice. But this particular student was so good at their job that they were hired to work full-time or part-time. So when they went for their during the school day experience, they were truly clocking in and out and being paid at the same time. And this year, this student is going to be graduating and they've been offered full-time employment for when they finish. So we're really working this student up to build stamina for when the years are finished with us in Cheltenham. On the flip side, we have another student who has some different transition goals. That student's goals are college, competitive employment, and living independently. So for that student, earlier on in their transition years, they decided to try Eastern. Wasn't really the program and thing that that student was looking for, but to me, like, how great is it that you get to practice, you know, and see if that's what you like or not. And so that student said, no, not for me. You know, I think I'll go in a different direction. So then that student began to work with the MCIU in the transition service experiences, where we get to try some work experiences in some different locations. We have particularly provided some links at this point for different college programs for students with autism. Colleges have really been expanding and not just, you know, certificate programs for kids that maybe are not, you know, they want the college life experience, but they're not doing maybe the curricular part of it. There are plenty of colleges who actually build really nice and some very robust support services for students with autism. Dr. Lang actually talks a lot about autism at the college level in her other life, but there's a very high percentage of students with autism who drop out of college after their first year. And so our colleges have really been trying to support those students better. So we have been trying to connect this family with some programming that's local. You know, if you want your child to go across the country, you know, there we can find those for you too. But everybody's wanting to do local. And in particular for this student, we talked about continuing to do a 5th year after the regular 12th grade year with us at the high school for what, you know, we call fine tuning. But the idea is once you've satisfied all your credits, we really want to just work from your transition plan period. So do we have electives at the high school that are of your area of career interest? Do we want to expand on the MCIU transition service into the employment part of things? Do we want to look at helping you get employment here in your local community so that we don't need to use CIU? That's an option too. Do we want to build in college visits because there's not an attendance issue after you're beyond your senior year? Like all sorts of neat things we can do. So two very different stories. I just wanted to highlight some things that we do for our students for transition. These are just some pictures. There's Mrs. Taylor in action there doing her little social skills group on the left. And then here on the right, we have Dr. Ryan running her morning meeting group with her students. In the middle, you probably saw this on social media, but this was our commercial that recently was pulled together with our video production class that finished in the first semester, and our Unified Bocce team, and our Unified Bocce coaches, and the kids all came together and made a commercial to promote signing up for Unified PE for this. So we won't play it for you right now, but just so you know, in the PDF that's in the board docs, there's no little YouTube triangle, but if you click it, it will play. I tried. So it will play, you just wouldn't think to do that because it's not there. Oh, sorry, that's okay. It was about to play. And so we have a few future goals at the high school specific to autism and autistic support. So what we're thinking about more in the Dr. Ryan and Skills for Life realm is thinking about more thoughtful course and teacher scheduling within Skills for Life. So one of the things that the block schedule really helped us to do was to look at what we learned from the first semester and say what changes do we need to make for the second semester. So we actually adjusted a few students' schedules so that they were together in particular for reading instruction, because we, again, just like I was saying at Cedar Brook, we found some strategies that worked better for those students. And so we regrouped them a little bit. And so we want to really think about that now that we know our students really well. We want to really think about that better for the upcoming school year. And then for our students that Mrs. Taylor and Mr. Eckhart and some of our other teachers manage specific to students with autism, we really want to think about reflecting that autistic support with more fidelity. So I mentioned to you that these students had always been with us, so we didn't have autistic support case managers. And so when you're not that case manager, you're thinking more large scale, you're providing learning support, you're thinking academics first. And I will never say that academics shouldn't be first, but if you're a student with autism and you have social behavior and communication needs, you can't be successful with your academics if we're not really thinking about those other pieces too. And so we're thinking about what are all of the different types of supports and ways that we can support those students so that they can maximize their academic success. And the last slide I just wanted to provide you with was students educated out of the district. So I serve as the LEA rep for those students who are at the secondary level. So this is the number of students that we have out of the district with either a primary or secondary disability category of autism. And so I mentioned earlier, we had one student who actually returned to us this year at the high school. He was ready and he returned and things are going well. We have two other students whose teams I'm a part of where we've talked about the transition. We're not quite there yet, but we know that's our end goal. And we had another student who we reevaluated this year and we said, you know what, this student is really not only doing well in this out of district placement, but this student continues to need this placement in order to be that successful. So in that case, we decided that student was best placed there, but I wanted to provide you some of those numbers as well.
So talking about some upcoming events, like I said, the goal is always grow your lifelong learners in education, as you all know. So we're trying to offer opportunities for continued growth, not just in our staffing, but in our community. So we put out a survey asking about training opportunities and topics that parents and community members would like to see. And so we sent it out back in December. We've gotten 16 responses, so there was about a 10% completion out of how many surveys we sent out. And it kind of breaks down by school, how many responses for each. So this upcoming Monday, for anyone who wants to join, we have a parent training coming up for behavior strategies for families to support students with autism. This is open to the entire community. So this is for anyone who might be working with or seeing or neighbor to or best friend of a child with autism. So the goal is to offer these strategies to support, because the reality is that, you know, somebody in your life, I think the statistics is like 1 in 4 children, somebody in your life might be on the spectrum. So having these strategies will really help. It's being run by one of our BCBAs, Dr. Brown Beasley, who has an extensive background in not only behavior, but working with children on the spectrum. And so when we had gotten an RSVP, we put out an RSVP to determine, because we wanted to offer both hybrid and in-person and both virtual. We got 7 responses. Most we're pushing for the virtual. So we're going to offer it in virtual just because it, you know, that's just what the push was. But we always try to put out the say first on what do you guys want, because we want the community to lead in on what they want. So that's coming up, like I said, this upcoming Monday. So anyone can join the link. Even if you didn't RSVP, it is open to everyone to join. And then in spring, we're going to also include one, which the topic is to be determined, as well as the date, which once again is going to be driven by those survey responses that we received, kind of knowing what does the community want. The goal is to really build that connection with the community and recognizing what they need, what they want, just like our students. So we're at the point of questions, which then the next portion of our presentation is an appendix. So I don't know if we want to go through the appendix or if that's just something to review and we can just go right to questions.
No, and I'll speak to the appendix. So there was some additional information that we wanted to make sure was available to help support the presentation. It really does serve as additional information. And some of the questions that may come up tonight may also be addressed in those appendices, but it will be posted online with the entire presentation so that people can really take their time and go through the different parts of it. And so I'll allow.
Okay, all right, thank you.
moments to go to questions.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Link and Ms. Kugler and Dr. D.
Miss D, I appreciate that. Not very
For the presentation. Before I open it up to the board to ask questions, and then we'll go to the folks online and then the folks here, I just was going to ask for some more acronym clarification, if that's okay. One of the slides mentioned the SET process. Could someone know what that is?
Oh, okay. So the SET process covers the communication. So it's the process that determines communication needs for a student. So it's setting, environment. Yeah, I have to like think through technology, and then so let's take it done.
Student environment
Test and then training, yeah. So it's the process that we pair with the IU to receive support for as well. And it's a process for determining students' communication needs. So that could look like AAC, like a device. It could be a switch. It could be an iPad. It could be a PEX board. So that process is followed to determining those needs and determining to specify their communication plan.
Thank you. And then the BCBA. Could you talk about what that position is, what they're qualified to do?
Absolutely. Am I allowed to also chime in because BCBA is here, or should I just explain her role? Okay. So it's board certified behavior analyst. So their role is really that focus on behavior. So with autism, or just with our autistic support program, Dr. Brown helps work with functional behavior assessments, FBAs, which helps determine the function of a behavior that a student may engage in. And that, let's call it an assessment, is completed in order to develop a positive behavior support plan, PBST. And that plan is the antecedent strategies that you can utilize to support this behavior. It gives a definition of the behavior, so what exactly it is. So for an example, we can use like tantrum. The tantrum has a definition for the child engaging in it. So that FBA identifies that definition, which is then included in the plan. And then it also identifies strategies for preventing it, so antecedent strategies, as well as consequence strategies on this is the result. Consequence typically has like a negative connotation, but it's the results that are either reinforcing the behavior or reinforcing the positive behavior we want a student engaging in instead.
I think this is an appropriate time if we can you can introduce. Dr.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So in the room, we have Dr. Ryan Brown Beasley. She is a district, so brought on as a district employee, BCBA. And like I said, she works closely with students across the district on the spectrum.
Yes, and this is my 7th school year, my first year as an employee, so it's a pleasure to be here.
And I think, and she's being very humble. But Dr. Brown Beasley she was working with us, not as an employee, but almost, I guess, to keep it in layman's term, as a consulting type of position. And did such a phenomenal job, worked so well with all of us here at Central Office, worked well with the teachers, many kudos and accolades from all of our principals. And so we were always kind of behind the scenes secretly wondering how we could get her on board full time. And so when the opportunity presented itself, we could not hesitate. We were glad that she also wanted to join us. And it has definitely been a pleasure to work with her. And she does so well with all of us, our children, as well as their families.
Thank
So,
you. Thank you so much.
and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you for that. Thank you for this, actually. And I have one more. I'm sure other people have, the other one that popped out to me, DTT, discrete trial training. Is that what that is?
Yes.
Could you
For the rest of us.
talk about what that is?
So it is an instructional strategy that not every student needs discrete trial training, but it is an instructional strategy to use that supports students on the spectrum in identifying specific, like it works in specific areas or needs that are identified in their IEPs or whatnot.
Thank you. I just wanted to clear those up.
Of course.
Julie?
Could we ask when this gets posted, the presentation, that some of the acronyms get spelled out? First time, because HR, I knew what that was.
HR.
HR. But, many people may not.
Of course. So I'll open it up now to the board for questions.
Sure. So some of these will be naive questions, so sorry in advance. There, in the very beginning, there were some slides around statistics, sort of about demographics. And I noticed a major disparity between or boys and girls in those. And I was curious, is that sort of, that's a normal, okay. And likewise, is there kind of a baseline expectation for racial breakdown as well? Is that expected to be?
That was very high. That was very high. I think even if you would look at it nationally, I would think that would be very high.
The high,
Just not on the racial breakdown, that the percentage of students, Black students we have who are identified as having autism support needs
is high
It's
compared
high.
to our general
yes.
population. And you just said, can I?
Yes.
Do we know why that might be?
So I just pulled up the special education data report from last school year. We won't have the one for this school year until probably May. Data is taken on December 1st, and our December 1 counts like a scary thing for teachers to hear. But that's when there's a snapshot. Every child who has an IEP and all the data goes into that. So last school year, our percentage of students with autism as a primary disability category was 14.6%, and the state average was 12.6%. Now, we talked in the policy meeting, for those of you who were here, about how every 6 years we go through cyclical monitoring. And cyclical monitoring, one of the many things they look at is, do we have any disparity, disproportionality? And so we weren't flagged for anything. So one of the things that's tough with autism is that the N is much smaller than, say, learning disability or other disability categories. So we have to be careful in, comparing individual percentage points. But we weren't flagged last year as that being disproportionate.
Thanks. And I first should have led with this. It was a great presentation. I really appreciate all of this. And I have way more questions than I'm going to ask because many of them are, I now know all the things I don't know, or not all the things, but many more things I don't know, and I'll be looking into those on my own.
Well, if you don't mind me interrupting, feel free to reach out though, because that's our goal, is that building that bridge. So
Yeah.
you can reach out to us to offer that support too, so you don't feel like you need to do all this.
Understood. But I just want to underscore how I think it's great as a board member to better understand this level of detail that I didn't quite know or understand before. Like, I understood the importance of this work, but it's helpful to sort of see it in clarity. So thank you all so much for this. I get the sense that every student diagnosed with autism it's a unique diagnosis. So there's no common, this is the goal of the autism support program. So given that, how are you able to effectively evaluate performances of a given program or a given staff member? And then I guess a parallel question is, are students in the autistic support program also going through the Pennsylvania standardized testing? And is that even a useful metric under all, under what circumstances would that even be a useful metric? So it's kind of a two-part question. I can restate the first one.
Yeah, sorry,
It was, how can you effectively evaluate performance of a given program or person who is doing the work?
So actually, a next step that we're also taking, that I didn't have in the slides, but another step that we're taking is we're actually looking into autistic support consultants to come in and to look at our program. Because obviously, from an internal view, as someone who goes in the classrooms weekly, I see things going on. We coach, we support myself and the other supervisors and Dr. Brown Beasley. But then also we're looking to have consultants come in to look at that programming to really help continue to develop it and make changes and address any concerns that we might not recognize or see in areas that might need to have continued growth, so we can have that identification. So we're meeting with consultants now to talk out that process and different services that can be offered. The second portion with the state assessment, students are determined on an individual level. So in the IEP, one of the sections is the assessment. So I actually oversee PASA for the district, which is the alternative state assessment. And so there's criteria points, there's questions that you have to go through for each child individually every year to determine which appropriate assessment do they take. So there isn't a general consensus of everyone in autistic support takes PSSAs or takes PASA. It's on an individual level, which the authenticity of it is similar to a lot of students when you're looking at a state assessment on, you have to take that score with some flexibility, identifying that it's not a one snapshot score of a child, is not the whole child. So that's why we have classroom assessment, local assessments too included, in their programming to have a bigger picture.
Just to add to that is that, you're talking about with students, it's why it's called an individual educational program. They have individual goals that all teachers, no matter what, because they're all different, but they have certain goals that basically we are responsible for collecting data to make sure they're making progress. So every single day they're taking data on basically where those behaviors, where those goals, what it looks like. So at the end, I can go down to a classroom and say, I want to see the data from the last 3 weeks to see if the students are progressing. That's not happening. Then we need to reconvene that IP to talk about, we have to change some things.
Got it. And so to that end, first off, that slide where you should compare the one with the X and Y axis. That was, you could see the change in programming and the impact it's having on the student outcomes. It sounds like maybe there's no ideal number though for what percentage of time any given student should. It's individualized, and so the way to evaluate whether that goal is being met is to compare actually the reality with their individualized goals in aggregate. Thank you. My last question is around the facilities. I love the pictures of the sensory hallways. I'm also very curious if there are facility needs that would, or resources for facility types of things that would be ideal that you all don't have. And I'm not trying to give any administrators with budget aneurysms, but I just wanted to open that thought process because we have an equity policy, and part of that is making sure students are provided what they actually need. I don't know to what extent these buildings were designed with autism support programming in mind, but so it's more of not rhetorical question, but I'm not expecting you to say oh yeah, we would love X, Y, and Z. But just wanted to throw that out there, that facilities strike me as the kind of investment that would be worth understanding.
As a person who's only been here a week,
Mhm.
okay, so I'm gonna represent that. One of the things that I do when I come in is I take a look at the programs. And I think one of the things we had talked about is having maybe a consultant come in and take a look at the program. I think this team would have a better answer down the road shortly after somebody comes and says, and we all look at it together as a group and say, okay, this is what we need this week. Because that's kind of part of my responsibility. I mean, even though I'm just kind of temporarily here, what I do is at the end, I like to make recommendations, say, this is what I see, this is what I think needs to be done. So that's something I think we need to take down the road as far as with the supports and services and resources that might be needed.
And that makes a lot of sense. And in our last Facilities and Financial Affairs Committee meeting, we talked about we're beginning the process of a 20-year capital plan. And so I suspect that there will be overlap of the outcomes of that study. Thank you. I'll pass it to other members.
All right, thanks, Mr. Schultz. Ms. Henry?
Yes. So one of your earlier slides, there was a line item about training. What is that? Is there like a specific cadence for training? I guess it's a multi-level question that I have. One is, how often does a training happen, right? And is it like a one and done, or do staff members and teachers, for example, who in the general education areas, so the kids are coming into those classrooms, do they receive ongoing training to help support students that are in their classrooms?
Yeah, so it's never one and done. If a training is offered, say, during a professional development day, so that might be an introduction to a topic, it could be a reiteration to a topic. That's where like our supports on the weekly basis come into to really check how that's going in the classrooms, to offer ongoing coaching and support to the staff. That same goes with IEP meetings. Yes, we have annuals every year with everyone, but school teams also meet to continue to talk about that collaboration and support. A teacher's role kind of has like a dual process in some scenarios of a teacher and a case manager. So they help support to making sure all of those SDIs, all of the specifically designed instructions are all going on in place in those classrooms and working with general education teachers. And we receive input from the staff, from our observations on our classroom visits, on recognizing here are areas that we see in needing to add additional training. So it's an ongoing thing of never just a one and done, but like a recognizing here's a need to address it. And it works in various ways. So early dismissal days, professional development days, like I said, coaching when we come in the weeks to meet, kind of working with the staff during the day with the student, because that helps too, is that the trainings are great when you get to go through information and talk about things in the grand scheme of things, but it helps even more to have that support in the classroom so that we can sit and show it in action and support as they're doing it in action.
And are the paraprofessionals also included in that same type of training?
Yes. So like I said, the topics specify on the needs, but paraprofessionals are also been included in many of the trainings as well.
Okay, we'll just go down the line.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I think we were all anxiously awaiting, at least I was, in terms of the autistic support training that in district and seeing how that's going. So one thing that I guess from your perspective, are there any key performance indicators that you're looking at in terms of identifying success of bringing the autistic support program in district?
Well, one of them was looking at student programming, being able to individualize, and not just general education, but looking at student programming on a more individual level to be able to have this blended programming. Being, as like Ms. Kugler said, being that we're meeting those kids' needs exactly where they are so that we can program appropriately. So coming back in district, that's really had the opportunity to, though the classrooms were physically in district, there was a disconnect. So having them back has really helped to be able to really make a whole picture. And these students who have always been in our community are really truly part of our community. So indicator is not particularly that there's an ideal LRE, but the student is an appropriate one for them. So there isn't a grand scheme of like, this is the perfect number or indicator, but on each individual level. And then their goal growth helps us see their progress and recognize our work with them too, as well, to indicate success within the program as well. Because like I said, those goals because they're individualized, isn't the same for every kid across a program or even within a classroom. So then we program within the room for that child or within the program for that child.
Thank you. One more question. In terms of the appendix, the first slide, I think Mr. Schultz was kind of getting to the question of the disproportionality. You indicated that there's 14.6% of our students with primary diagnosis of autism. Of that 14.6%, what percentage are African American?
So the state doesn't break it down by disability category, but we can break that down through IEP writer, like in the moment for our students right now. That's something we can definitely.
You can break it down from the pie chart. You told us how many African-American students you had in K-4.
The appendix actually does have the exact numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can, that's pretty easy to calculate. I just did it in my head on the Dan. And it's about 70%.
Yeah, so I still, thank you for doing the math. But yeah, that just struck me as also disproportionately, focused on African American students being diagnosed with autism. And if it's the appropriate diagnosis, absolutely, that's great. But if it's not, if it's based on social or behavioral issues that get diagnosed as autism, that's not good. So just curious about that. One other question in terms of the learning support and autistic support. I think Ms. Henry kind of started to ask that question. Is there an intersection between learning support and autistic support and emotional support and the other supports that a child may receive?
Yes, so at secondary, it's a little different. I guess starting at Elkins Park School and moving up is a little different because all of our programs and teachers are all together in the building. So yes, our children might change classes, period by period, and that one class may be in the class taught by the teacher who provides emotional support services from a case management perspective. The next one might be a gen ed classroom. The next one might be the teacher who provides autistic support services. We're responsible for thinking about it from two different angles. The state requires us to have an attachment of type of support to the teacher and the case management of students on their caseload. When we think about classrooms, really, it's just a special education classroom and a regular education classroom. But we often talk in ways that intermingle the two. So, we all know, I know where my emotional support classrooms are at the high school and at Cedar Brook. The K4s are a little different.
Yeah, so a little different, not too much. But K4 is similar. It's based on what students need. So we have in each of the buildings, we have autistic children who receive some emotional support. We also have some children who receive life skills, depending on whatever their needs are. But then there might be, a specialist in that building that might provide the social skills for that child. So it all depends. It all depends on what they need, and we really try to tweak what they need and just accommodate that.
Thank you.
I'll just go, yeah, that's the order.
All right.
Certainly echo the appreciation for the presentation tonight. Two things I'll note that I heard the most was individualized attention, right? Individualize, one of those words where you start to stumble as many times as you say it, but you got to roll it. And the other one was inclusion. And as we are wrapping up the strategic planning process, but earlier on we saw like a note around like the district is like inclusive. And so I've learned as it relates to autism support, what that actually looks like and can say with some confidence, yes, that is true. And so appreciate that clarity that you all provided. There was a slide earlier that showed what type of support students were receiving at different schools. And there were some clusters of the type of support at school. So is there some context to share about like why that?
It's specific to the K4 schools.
Yes.
So life skills support, for example, is a very, very small percentage. And so we don't have life skills support classrooms in each of our K4s. We only have that at Glenside.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna ask Dr. Lane, since that's your area, to speak more to that, to the elementary.
Yeah, so for instance, there is there's an autistic child who's receiving life skills supports, and like Ms. Kugler said a little bit earlier, we identified the needs based on each of the individual needs. So at this time, that child's dominant need is life skills and functional skills. But then we also have children that are at Cheltenham Elementary who are diagnosed with autism, who have emotional needs. So right now, that's the level of support that they're receiving. That doesn't mean we don't also address, the social and communication needs that they need as a child with autism. But right now, their emotional and self-regulation is really their primary need.
And so the key point is we don't program by disability,
Right.
program by need.
And so, and then in some cases, if like a student who might be in an area of Glenside might be at Cheltenham because at Cheltenham, we have the staff that meets there. Okay, got it.
And we're constantly teasing that out. We're constantly, like Ms. D said a little earlier, we're looking at the progress towards goals. We're constantly teasing that out. Like right now, the child, I know, for instance, there was a child that might transition to a different program based on their needs. So we addressed their needs, they've met their goals. Now they have a different set of needs. So what does that look like? And so we talk to the team that they need to transition with, and we create a nice smooth transition.
Thank you for that. And then just following up on it seems absolutely appropriate that we have people every week in the schools who can kind of go back from like central office support to in schools and, translating and research. At the same time, I hear us the use of consultants and things like that. And I am a consultant, so I get the value of that. But ideally, is there a place where there would be in-house support where, and then, up to you as well, where there would be in-house support where some of that evaluation happens in-house?
So I would say yes. And also to Mr. Evans' point, it's always good to have someone look at it differently because we've been looking at it for so long, and sometimes you can't get tunnel vision if things are working. You just keep going, and sometimes innovation comes out of shaking things up. So we do pride ourselves in having others look at our work to make sure we're being innovative. We visit other districts, we visit other classrooms, we make comparisons from program to program to make sure we're up on the latest. All of us, subscribe to the latest digital and physical print material and research to make sure that we're up on what's going on. And again, we use the expertise in-house, but we also respect the fact that it may be a different way of doing it. And I'll tell you, that's one of the benefits of having an interim director is Mr. Evans has been to multiple school districts and outside of Montgomery County and he brings such a very, very lens, and almost every conversation we've had, he's able to offer 3 options. I've seen it done this way. When I was here, it was done that way. I also know people who promote that way. So that has been really helpful for us in this transition, is to hear things differently and to hear from someone who's on the ground, who's been in these buildings, been in these classrooms, and has spoken to people who hold our roles in other districts and how things have been done. So we're trying to have a healthy balance because we also want to make sure we're always growing our own. And we also want to make sure that when we're making these big decisions, that there are people who really know our children, really know our faculty, and really know the Cheltenham culture. So we try to make sure that it's a healthy balance of getting input, but also knowing what we want for our district.
Appreciate that. Thank you. There was a note about in the life skills program, like 30% average in general education. Could you give some context in terms of, should we be really celebrating that? Is that okay and we can do better? Is that like we need to jump that 10 to 20 percentage points? Like, just could you have some context?
So I would like to see it be higher. I think, it's hard in particular there because our students who participate in Skills for Life are with us from 9th grade, 14 through age 21. So the highest number of each individual one was 60% in the gen ed environment. Also, the teachers very honestly said to me, I might need to rethink that, because I kind of asked the same question. And we want to look at that with more fidelity because all the time that they're outside of our Skills for Life classrooms and our other special education classrooms is considered time in gen ed. Anytime in the community, anytime at work experiences, anytime at all. So they're actually going to relook at that. But yes, I would like to see it higher. The block scheduling, one sort of issue with that is because a class is 84 minutes long and there's 4 periods in a day, you have 2 special education classes a day, you're already at 50%. So we try to be flexible with that and make sure that our kids, if they can go to work and have that practical work experience instead of being in our independent living special education class, for example, or a morning meeting class, that's a great swap because it's practical hands-on experience, but it's also in the gen ed environment. So, but we will be looking at that. We weren't super happy with that.
Okay. I appreciate the transparency.
Sure. I just want to add a little context to that as well for the K to 4 because that is a really great number. We're similar numbers in the K to 4, but we are really reflective on that because we were pushing so much, we went then general ed, but were they really getting what they needed? And I'm saying they as a whole, but we're looking at each individual. So the teachers and I have looked really closely at each of the individuals and see if they're definitely making progress. And if they're not, then what are we doing? Reflecting on that. So yes, that number is great as a whole. Sure that our children, especially our babies in K to 4, are getting what they need before we can have them in the gen ed.
Which has implications for what happens.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Just a couple more. What's working in terms of family engagement? Because I imagine with the IPs, right? There's another layer of engagement that's just needed to meet these goals, right? For the full-time job offer, we heard it last night, right? It's not just what happens in schools; it's happening, right? What's happening in homes and schools. So what's working in terms of family engagement?
Well, part of it is just really encouraging our teachers to be transparent with our families, right? So every kid is on that individual level. So it's being able to keep that open communication of what that looks like. Daily communication logs, which I know Dr. Houston uses. A lot of our teachers are using the different technology aspects. So whether it's Dojo points or things like that to keep open communication with the families. Same with when we have these IP meetings between the teacher, the team, Dr. B, myself, we share the resources with the family. So, hey, this is working. This is what your kid's visual schedule is like. Sharing it with them. So, and that included in the parent training coming up is offering them this is what's working with your kid in school. So here's something you can utilize at home. And a lot of it then does get adjusted for the skills and the what you're working on at home. So visual schedule is important, but at school you'll see reading, you'll see math. At home you might see your morning routine of wake up, brush your teeth, eat breakfast. So we give them the opportunity to share. We share this. So when we do a child social stories are very strong, research-driven practice with students on the spectrum. We share the social stories with the parents at home at the meetings or when the needs come up so that we can make sure that we are being cohesive in our planning. Because this is a whole child, so we want to look at it as not just what's done in the 7-hour school day, but then what's done the other hours of the day and making sure the parents have those resources. So it's like, we encourage them to ask, but in the same, we share it in meetings or share it with those regular communications with the families on here's something we're doing, here's something we're using. Hey, it's working. And if it's not working, let them know it's not working because kids' behaviors change. So what might be in a plan one year, we recognize might not be in the plan the next year because we just have to continue to individualize because new behaviors come up, which is why maybe new FBAs are completed or new strategies come up as being more appropriate. And so we always encourage the teachers, especially, is that as things are working and we're collecting data or as things are not working and we're collecting data, is having these meetings, having these open conversations with families about, hey, this is something that is working or not working, and these are adjustments we want to make. There'll never be a perfect plan that's going to work every day for the rest of a child's life, especially when on the spectrum. So it's like keeping that in mind, and which is where we keep that open line of communication. So like I said, our teachers are very frequently contacting and being in communication with the families.
And I just want to add on to that. We meet with ZEEK every month. So we have a meeting with them every month, and we hear what the community has to say, and they provide us feedback. So we do that as well.
Yes. And just sort of wrapping up, just 2 more. Following up on around the overrepresentation of people with black folks. So we live in a society that's structured by race, right? So if we look at the data for us, even if it's aligned with like other data, there would still be that question, well, is there overrepresentation there, right? And so no, it is. So to what extent does it then, like, to what extent and how is it discussed as part of like just business that we do here in Cheltenham? And I know you said it can be flagged, right? So let's say it's not flagged as like disparate from the state, like to what extent and how is it a part of our discussions?
So I would say, I'm just speaking from a general level, and not just in special education, we speak to these overrepresentations. Our department, Office of Education, meets once a week. The special ed department meets separately once a week, and it comes up probably once a week because we're looking at data. We have a superintendent who has doubled down on our data focus, and we've been having these mid-year reviews with all of our schools. We had one today at a K-4 building, and the question from the superintendent, the question from the directors from the Office of Education is always, when we disaggregate the data, why do you think this number is so high? Why do you think we have so many students of color or African-American students in particular, so many boys in this particular category? So we have been pressing the issue not only from a higher level, but also drilling down to schools and classrooms to see if there's any trends or anything that we see across, okay, this particular teacher or kids who are in 5th grade at EP, who come from a specific K-4 school. So we're talking about it all the time. When we, in the school year and classes are formed and principals start to figure out which kids are assigned to which teachers, we're always reminding them to have that in the back of their minds. When we meet with families to talk about student progress, and when the conversation comes up or leads to, do we need a permission to evaluate? Is this a student to look at for special education? We make sure we look at all data that we're not jumping the gun. This is not just about, well, you know, this child is misbehaving. Let's go from 0 to 80. And so I would say our current special education department and our general education folks, we always make sure that before we change a student's placement or do anything that is out of quote unquote the ordinary, that we back it up with data. And I would say that our superintendent holds us to that particular standard when we're meeting and talking about children and talking about programs and who's going to be in it, who's going to be impacted, what may it look like. And if we can foresee that there will be over-representation, we kind of go back to the drawing board and think about modifying our parameters, modifying the way we approach it, because we can see it coming. And so, you know, we are in some places, based on our overall population, we're always looking at what the overall population is and is it representative of that. So if you have one of our buildings, this is just a random number, this is not actual data. If one of our buildings, for example, was 70% African American, we would expect that certain groups would be representative of that, but there's still, it would be all children. And it kind of goes back to even when we had our gifted education study that showed that although certain buildings may have been more students of color, we had an overabundance of white students in our gifted programming. And what did we do? We changed our screener. We moved our screener up. So we've been making those adjustments because we understand the board's commitment to equity. We know that that policy was put into place not as a placeholder, but for us to actually do something with it. So we revisit that often. So these meetings, we always talk about the mission and vision statement. When we meet in closed doors, I feel like we're always talking about equity, and if we're being true to our equity policy, and we know we have an equity thread or strand in our new strategic plan. So we're very focused on, that is one of our main things in our strategic plan. That has to be something that we discuss every time we make a change or make a move. So it's very much alive.
Yeah, and that's commendable for all of the reasons that you listed in terms of policy, but just in terms of a commitment to our community. And it's a tough conversation to have, but it's absolutely needed. And what I hear from you is that it's rooted in accountability. It's not rooted in like, okay, let's find the teachers, right? Let's blame. It's rooted in like, what's best for the individual students, really how does that trickle up to the system as well. So certainly commend the administration at the various levels at that conversation we had. Last but not least, and it's a great segue, strategic plan. Really looking forward to it. I see Ms. Keene over there. I'm really looking forward to the when we say the MTSS system is built out fully, all tiers. Could you just share with me the connection between MTSS and what will be special education or even autism support, if any?
Sure. So I view MTSS is like the net that provides support prior to a child being identified. And so it is our job in the MTSS system to make sure that we are giving each individual exactly what they need to make sure that they're making progress. So we don't have that overrepresentation in special education. So instead of going from 0 to 100, evaluating children, having them identified even though they haven't received any type of support. So that's where that overrepresentation happens.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Essentially, it's the net that covers in order to essentially prevent going further into needing some type of other type of service.
So the team meets, the MTSS team meets and talks about students who may be struggling, putting together intervention plans for them before we get to that point. So we look at interventions and we might say, we're gonna try this for 3 weeks. And then after 3 weeks, we're gonna reevaluate that. Maybe we need another different intervention. We might get to the point where we've used all the interventions, it's time maybe to evaluate. That's
Gotcha. Gotcha. So when you wouldn't have a student who has an IEP and is still receiving like that type of MTSS service, that's already beyond that point.
Yeah, because that's what special education.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, the NCSS, I'm sorry, Dr. Lane. Go ahead.
Yeah, and we're part of the conversation. So at the K to 4 level, so I'm part of the conversations. So even as a spectator, like sitting back, you know, if they're at tier 1 and tier 2, I can still hear the conversations on students that they're talking about and offer my advice on ways to provide supports as well prior to them getting to meeting and evaluation.
So there's certainly a connection.
Yes.
Yeah, and like I like the net analogy because I guess if you catch them in the net, we don't have to go further than to.
And I also think with that net metaphor, it's the idea of casting a wide net
Okay.
to capture any and everyone, and then to figure out, start sorting. Who's it working for, who's it not working for, and to keep offering additional services until you get to the point where Mr. Evans said, well, we realize that what we're offering, students need something more individualized that's outside of the group. So the MTSS process starts with the larger groups.
Got it.
And then we kind of drill down and it gets smaller. And the idea is there's only a small group of students who really should rise to the occasion of needing an individualized education plan. And in order to successfully get to that point and feel comfortable that this is where a student needs to be, we have to show our due diligence that we've given all of the resources, all the support, all of the help that we could up until that point.
And before that, for MTSS and RTII was a child would struggle, what are we gonna do? Let's test them.
Straight to, okay, got it. I saw one more, but I'm going.
Actually, Ms. Walker, before you go, I'm gonna sort of take a point of privilege here. I know there's 4 board members here, so still may let one ask questions, but there's 3 people patiently waiting.
2 people, 3 questions.
2 people, 3 questions patiently waiting in cyberspace. So I'm wondering if we could go to.
The board, typically, the board should.
The board should go. I know. Yeah, it's been an hour and a half, so.
But, yeah, I mean.
I realize. Okay, that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I don't have many questions at this time. So many good questions have been asked, and I do want to add, again, thank you. So much information, so much detail and work went into the presentation. I appreciate that. And I think as Dan said, you know, it kind of shows you how much you don't know. And I appreciate that. You know, so much more to learn. I really enjoyed hearing Ms. Kukler about some of the transition planning part, really interesting. I have been fortunate that I got to sit in on some of the SEEK have shared with us the appeal centers the last few weeks. There have been these Wednesday night learning about inclusion and transition. And it kind of, for me, having been able to go to those, I'm like, oh, this is all really, I love when everything kind of merges together and I feel like I'm actually getting this. So thank you. I'm curious, this is not related per se to bringing the autism support classrooms in-house, but our students who were not in those classrooms, but that may also have an autism diagnosis, what do they, that maybe they're gen ed the bulk of the day. What are there services that they now, maybe they were getting them anyway, or services now that they are able to get now that we have more staff? Does that, and I guess that would be more social emotional if they, I don't know, that was just kind of something that popped up, but the higher functioning students.
I guess it depends on their needs.
Yeah.
If it's a need, we're responsible for providing that need.
And that was presumably already happening, but I just kind of was curious, because we're talking so much about the students who were already in those programs. And just kind of thinking about, does this allow us to maybe, especially a super high, who, I don't know if that was you, I wrote down phonetically how to say your name. Mrs. D. Jana Vittorio?
There you go.
Pretty close. I was like, I don't know, it was you that mentioned, the statistics, 1 in 4 students, I think someone said, is that?
Yeah, I said it, don't quote me on it exactly, because I have to look at the
point
update.
being, but we all know someone, even if we don't know that they have that diagnosis, that hasn't been shared with us, those higher functioning students, but maybe there is the opportunity that some of those, that's me just kind of thinking. And Dr. Lang, K-4, I've had, in my former life as a PTO president, a lot of time spent, in Wyncote in particular. And, we always tried that balance of like involving the kids that were in those IU classrooms, but it was complicated for a variety of reasons. So I'm so excited to hear all of the ways that we can really, those students feel like in every way, not just this assembly works with the schedule or this particular program. So from the beginning, I was so excited about that. And just so glad that they're getting to enjoy all of the amazing things at all of our schools that, for various reasons, they were not able to be a part. So thank you. Because I know that the scheduling K-12 is not an easy task, it sounds like, to try to get all of those students exactly what they need and spend as much time in those gen ed experiences as possible so that they can feel like a middle schooler and have, more places. So really just a thank you, not more questions. Mr. Howard?
Great. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm going to follow up with some other questions that were asked. So the questions are along the lines of the diagnosis with autism. Can you talk about, I'm sure it varies on a case-by-case basis, but what is the role of the school district versus what is the role of the family outside the school district for that diagnosis? If you can talk about that, at least in broad terms, so I have a better understanding.
Cover that. Wait, sorry. Ask the question one more time so I can make sure I'm internalizing
Sure.
what you're saying.
Effectively, it's what's the role of the school district to help either to make the diagnosis or maybe say, well, maybe the student should be diagnosed versus how much of that winds up being the parent outside the school district through medical professionals who are not affiliated with the school district.
Yeah, so with autism, it's one of those diagnoses that have it's a twofold because there's a medical diagnosis of autism and then a school-based diagnosis. So a child might have a medical diagnosis of autism, but not meet the needs for special education from the disability standpoint of autism. So during the evaluation process, if that's something with a medical, then we'll, follow through that process of, doing the appropriate rating scales and assessments to determine the possibility for the disability category for autism for school-based. So that's something we do take into account because the parents are part of the evaluation process. So if there is an outside diagnosis that is taken into account, if it is a student who falls in those areas of social, language, communication based needs, that could be something that is considered in the process. And like I said, during the first stages of evaluation, it's really involving the whole school team on that conversation of what needs to be part of the PTRE or the permission to reevaluate or permission to evaluate and which assessments are appropriate. So like ADOS is a assessment for autism, as well as there's the ACERS rating scale. So those are different things that kind of help give us a picture of determining a student's eligibility with that diagnosis. But like I said, it is a twofold with medical versus, because you can have a disability, you can have someone high functioning with anxiety who doesn't need special education services. So they're not hand in hand, like you have a disability, so you have special education services. It may be that your needs do not adversely impact your functioning in school. So that's kind of where that teases out, kind of like Dr. Lynn talked, teasing out with it. So it's all part of that evaluation process and determining that.
Thank you. My last related question is, in terms of communication with the parent guardians, is how much of that involves, I guess, feedback from them and indirectly their medical professionals for their students, for their children, in terms of if the diagnosis changes or is there feedback from the school district saying, well, we think the student has either advanced or maybe they've gone backwards in some ways? And what's the general high level feedback communication both to the parents and then directly to medical professionals for the students, and then the feedback that you get from the parents and the medical professionals back to the school district?
So typically teams at the beginning of the year, when we know that there's other people involved, we'll get not waivers, but some forms signed to be able to communicate with those people, because that's a big thing, is that collaboration. So especially if students receiving services outside of school, like occupational therapy, and they have occupational therapy in school, having that bridge communication. Parents will share that information in the initial process when school psychologists reach out. So it does look very different on an individual level. I can't speak as a brand like this is everyone, but if that is a need that is potentially deemed, like I said, that's where that evaluation process comes in, is making sure that we are also assessing for a school-based need for autism as well. So it's like I said, where those like two of the major like assessments that we utilize, the ADOS and ACERS, really come into play as well. Because like I said, it might not be a child with a medical diagnosis of autism. Autism may not be like their disability may not particularly be negatively adversing their school functioning. Okay. So like I said, it's kind of on an individual basis on level of communication, but we have that opportunity to have that, those forms signed to be able to communicate.
And I guess my last question is, are there cases, and just so high level, what happens if parents just don't give you that access, or they're not communicative, or they're not really a judgment statement, or they're effectively, at least for the school district's perception of these, not as supportive and as communicative as maybe you want them to be? What happens then with those students?
Well, wait, sorry.
So I think, I can answer this question. So, you
No, you're good. I was just saying, I internalize and it takes me minutes to internalize.
I think what you're saying, the IEP team process includes the parents.
Right.
We need their permission or agreement on anything. So in my career, we've had parents say, I don't want such life. We can't provide it. Okay. Now, if we have an special education, there's a disagreement with supports and services, the IEP team says, here's our recommendation. Here's our IEP. Here's what we call a NORA, which means we need your permission. This is what we're going to provide. Right? You can agree or disagree, and then there's a process from that. That's informed meeting, mediation, process. So there's a whole process, and it includes the parents at every step of the way. The district can't do anything without parent permission or parent agreement. Say parent agreement, not parent agreement. That process. So there are situations where parents might say, you know what, I want to take my child out of special education. I don't want it anymore. We don't have any say in that. It's basically we basically exit the.
And can I add, Mr. Cohen, to your question too, is one of the things that I know that I think our department does well is they don't just make the one phone call and kind of give up. They phone calls, we send our social work team to knock on doors. We also find other adults in the building. It may be someone else who works with the children, paraprofessional, to really try to get the parents on board for the process, on who they feel comfortable with, who we feel like can, get them to be on board. So we ask again until we can get them as involved as possible.
Great, thank you very much.
Great. So first, just with the information, I greatly appreciate the presentation as well. I'm also very grateful for this board because I just want to share that a number of the questions that were asked, again, provided me with a lot of information, but with everybody at the table, you can just feel that there's a lot of general ownership and passion behind wanting to see our students succeed and this very new program, right? I think a lot of these questions are, right, we're doing this in-house now. Like we really want to understand, I know myself as one board member wants to understand how to truly support the program, right? It is, I may have glanced away a bit when it was MCIU because I'm like, hey, they know what they're doing. They have a program. Maybe I should ask more questions about that. But now that it's in-house, I think the question is, at least from my perspective, is really around like you truly want to support the CC to be generally successful. So my questions just come from like two different parts. One is just about data. I know we talked about, Black boys and Black children being identified higher. So I just want to reflect on that a little bit, right? So first, with us doing this autism support programming in-house, how many of our neighboring districts are doing this? Are we one of the few, or are we of the masses? Is everyone else in Montgomery County doing autism support in-house? Just curious about that.
Yeah.
So everyone
the districts that I've been in, majority of them are at autistic school. It depends on the level. There's itinerant, supplemental, full-time. Most school districts are now doing itinerant, supplemental, support programs.
Okay.
You have very, very few doing full-time programs.
Very few are doing full-time. Sure.
Is ours considered? I don't know the category. Sorry.
When you talk about the percentage of time in the regular class compared to special education, that's where you come into itinerant, supplemental, full-time. Itinerant, mostly out into the general education, 80% or more of the time. Supplemental, I think it's 50 to 80%, 38%, was it? 20 to, and then that's supplemental, which means they're more in the special education class because their needs are more, they need more direct instruction. And then the full-time is the majority of the time is spent in the special education class.
Thank you. Sorry for interrupting.
No, great. I was getting there. I remember supplemental from the first slide, but I just wasn't sure, or second slide, I just wasn't sure about the relationship. So I appreciate the follow-up question. Because I say that because I'm really curious as to her. Also, we had a student come to us with some skills that, we needed to address, and it wasn't a part of, we kind of caught us by surprise. My question is more like, do we know if families are coming to Cheltenham because they believe we are doing it better, or we're actually doing it, are we doing it better, right? And I think that's, for me, the converse of over-identification to it. That's the opposite side of over-identifying, right? Maybe we are, maybe we're doing it really well, and people are like, hey, it's close to where my family lives, and so I just want to go there, as opposed to driving much further away from where their family actually is. So I don't know if we have, through our intake process or through the IEP process, we understand how a student arrives to us, right? In kindergarten, maybe it's very obvious, right? Came here for the K through 12 Cheltenham experience, but for a 4th or 5th grade student, or 8th grade or 9th grade student even entering the high school, do we know if the student came to us because they believed we had resources that maybe weren't available somewhere else, or they quite frankly thought we were doing it better?
So that's to be determined. So we just start. So over time, we'll be able to take a snapshot of that trend data. I'm sure the team can bring that. These are all our students that we've taken back. I know from SEEK and just speaking with parents, the importance of making sure that we do have a strong autism program that drives a lot of decisions that parents make, which is part of the reason why we're looking at having some outside folks, with us just being in the first year, really come in and take a look at programmatically, how are we doing, what are strengths, and what are some potential areas for growth. So that question that you posed would be one that we would further be able to answer as we go through another round, potentially next year, and we can track from year to year. Right now, we just have baseline data. So.
That's fair. It makes sense. That kind of rings for me, just generally, right? Like, I know I chose Cheltenham, right, for a reason, and it was because of the schools. And quite frankly, maybe other Black families like mine are quite frankly choosing Cheltenham for the same exact reason. Not saying that we aren't over-identifying, or that we can say that we're not over-identifying, but maybe we are just better. Maybe we're doing it well. And that's a reason why families are returning to us. Just putting that out there is something for us to consider, because I do think we have an amazing group of individuals who are doing this work, and maybe that word is out on the street. I would hope so. Right. So that's kind of my first thing. Sorry, just kind of thinking about positive aspect of what we could be discussing here. Like I know and understand clearly all of the various impacts of what over-identification looks like and its prevalence in this world. And I just thinking about the demographics where we live, and I'm just kind of curious about that, right? So looking forward to more on that. A second question that I have going back to the very beginning in terms of some challenges was around our paraprofessional staffing nationwide. We know that that's a problem. Are there any actions that we're taking or that we should be taking that maybe we aren't, to be able to, quite frankly, elevate us as the place for paraprofessionals to want to come and work? I don't know what that looks like. I just know that in my normal job, that is when I'm not here doing board work, and that's what I would be looking to do, because I'm currently doing it in some other ways. I'm just curious if there's anything in place about that, or if, you know, if we're kind of just like, well, it is what it is. I'm just kind of curious.
We've kind of already addressed that early on with some adjustments that we made for parents.
Okay.
We are getting ready to go through BEC negotiation, and I'm sure that will be a hefty part of that dialogue, not just from parents, but for our student aides and other positions that there's currently a shortage in, that we need to make sure that we're positioned to be competitive with our surrounding districts. So it doesn't take rocket science to figure out what I'm talking about. But because of BEC and negotiations,
Understood.
we're getting ready to approach, but we're actually in, to be honest.
Very much so aware of that perspective, and I did want to raise it for that reason, actually specifically, to just know that that was something.
As an outsider, I've been in 8 different school districts in the last 8 years, 9 school districts. Everybody's having a problem. Everyone is having struggles with getting some support staff.
But to speak on our work, we are working closely with HR, the Office of Education, with outside agencies. Like we are, it's never an acceptable, like, this is it. So we are always going to, and so there's even, you know, buildings and staff and the HR department are expressing the opportunities to come work in the district, especially within the community, because it's great to involve the community in that process. So we really are working actively, consistently to fill those needs, so that it's not just a blank, well, too bad.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. My last question is, so for obvious reasons, right, I represent Cheltenham on Eastern's Joint Operating Committee. So I have been kind of curious about the role that Eastern plays in autism support, right? Like we kind of talk about all of the various programs and the types of different support. You shared, you know, in the student's experience that didn't quite work out. We've heard from a family who has been at quite a number of our most recent committee meetings, again, asking questions because they have a child who I believe has been identified, maybe wasn't placed at Eastern. But the question is just about what does that role look like? Is Eastern like you know, where does it fit in, I guess? And do we have something similar? It's a two-part question. So where does Eastern fit in, and what do we have that kind of bridges that I guess what Eastern can't do or what we can't provide? Like, is there anything?
I think that's a great question. So we have our representative for students with IEPs from Eastern. Her name's Veronica, and she attends as many IEP meetings that we hold as we can. She supports our students when they're there. That being said, for any of our students who maybe are experiencing some struggles within the program for various reasons, Dr. Brown Beasley, I know, has gone to Eastern and has shadowed and made suggestions there, because the support of the BCBA is part of the IEP, and the IEP follows the child. So if they need some expertise, you know, Dr. Brown Beasley is our BCBA who supports all of our students with autism, not just us. Also, I know our Lakeside counselor at the high school, this is not specific to students with autism, she has done some overlap as well, helping students. Maybe she might go there and do a counseling session, or now virtual. Like, that's one of the nice things. She can log on with the student while the student is there instead. So those are a few things that we've done. We want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support that child being successful. And for the example I shared, that student just decided, I don't think I want to do this program, right? But, you know, I think there are ways for us to continue to ensure that Eastern knows we're here to actively support our students when they're in the program with you. I'm thinking of another student who we have actually who goes to Eastern with a paraprofessional. And so, you know, for that student, that's what works for them too. So.
Got it. Okay, good. Yeah, it answers all my questions, everything I have. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other board questions? I have questions, and I feel bad, very, very badly, that there are people out there who have questions. I actually have a lot of questions, which I won't ask them all, but my overarching, it's not even a question, it's more of like a statement or a concern. And I really appreciate this presentation and all of the information, because this is exactly, I think, at least I know as one board member, what I was looking for in terms of what exactly has happened since, we said sayonara to the MCIU and said, let's do this in-house. So I think that this is very helpful to sort of really understand what's going on in the buildings. So I really appreciate the level of detail. I think my overarching kind of thought about all of this stems out of Mr. Taylor's presentation and his two wonderful students yesterday, which is what are we doing to ensure that our kids in the autistic support classroom, and also this goes for all kids with IPs, but particularly because these are kids, sometimes kids who are sort of the most noticeable as different, if you will, feel that they belong in our buildings, belong to our school communities, belong to this district. And I see that those hallways, and I think to myself, those should be sensory hallways for all students. Are they? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Because if they're known as the sensory hallways for kids who need autistic support, that would be pretty terrible. Okay.
No, that's not the case.
Okay.
We highlighted it for the purposes of this
Okay.
presentation, but absolutely not.
Okay. All right. So that's really good. And but I'm also wondering sort of along the lines of like what are we doing as a district to ensure that kids don't need to earn their way into general ed? Do you know what I mean? Like, what are we doing to ensure that we have universal design for learning in all of our classrooms, from K through 12? What are we doing to make sure that the littlest kids, because those are really the kids, the elementary, right? The K through 4, they shouldn't have to earn their way into regular ed. Nobody should have to. That should be the baseline, right? And then we scaffold around them. And so, my concern is it's great that we have the LRE chart is improving, and that was certainly the hope, right? When we did this, that was one of the major hopes, is that would happen. But are the kids who are receiving these supports who are able, because I would assume we probably have some kids who are maybe dual diagnosed autistic, need an autistic support and gifted, right? Like, are they participating in the kindness ambassadors? Are they participating in problem solvers? Are they going to reading Olympics? Are they participating in the programs that their peers with IEPs would participate in, not in a mascot-y kind of way, not like a let's trot out the kid with a disability and like pat them on the head and say, oh, this is so nice, but like in an actual, like, I belong here kind of way. And so for me, like, that's still, it feels like sort of an open question. And maybe that's because I'm not in the buildings and I don't know what's going on in the buildings, so I'll fully admit that. But I worry about that still. Like, how do we ensure that, and the families of kids who are receiving autistic support programs feel like they belong and they're part of the school community? How are we making sure that happens? So I just sort of put that out there. I necessarily have an answer. That's my overall kind of hope, concern, thing that kind of keeps me awake at night when we have these kind of discussions. Is that happening? I think the other more specific types of questions are sort of a little bit more mundane, but I was curious about the related services. This sort of goes back to the consultant in-house type of question, the OT, the PT, the speech. How many of those are in-house and how many of those are contracted?
Do you want to speak on it? So our speech therapists are contracted with the district, and then we have outside contracts for our occupational therapist, physical therapist, and one BCBA, one of our BCBAs.
Okay. So OT, PT are still out of district. That's how it was when my daughter was here. I just wanted to make sure that I still understood that was happening. So, and then, so they're not always, so they're like not assigned, are they assigned to buildings, or how does that work? Or they work at one specific building?
They're assigned
Okay. And then the slide, I think it was 37, about the out-of-district placements. Is that the IEP team has decided that a child should be in an out-of-district placement? Okay, so that's not that doesn't include the agreements that we're asked to sign or agree or approve at almost every board meeting that are settlement agreements.
Right.
So those are just IEP teams have come together and said my child. So we could have theoretically quite a few other kids identified as needing autistic support who are in parentally placed out of district placements. And we're not keeping track of them.
Well, we do keep track of them. It's just in a different place because when you do sign those agreements, you're signing that we're doing that in lieu of providing a free appropriate public education. And so that goes along with the IEP. So that slide is just for students who are placed by their IEP.
That, as one board member, that is a question that I've been asking, Mr. Fishbein has been asking that question for quite some time. Exactly sort of how are we keeping track of all of these sort of settlement agreements that we are asked to approve? What's happening to these children? Where are they? What are their disabilities? Kind of what led up to them having to, their parents take this step to hire a lawyer and get them, sort of placed out of the district. I'm very curious as to how many of those kids actually have autism, honestly. How many of those parentally placed children are on the autism spectrum? I would venture to guess that it's not an insignificant number, but I have no idea. So I think I would just put that out there that chart gives us a snapshot of the kids the team has placed, right? But it doesn't include all those other kids who are out there somewhere, hopefully getting services that they need. I think I just put that out there. I think the other thing I would agree, I echo the statements, the average time that kids are spending in general ed at the high school, hopefully we can get a more accurate number on what that actually is. I hope it's higher. I hope we can get it higher. I agree with that for sure. Thank you for the transition. That's very helpful. Really interesting to see what's going on there. To see specificity. And I am curious about the dual diagnosed kids, the kids with autism and gifted. Do we know how many? I don't think we have.
Any that came up in our data. No, not that I'm aware of.
I don't know.
You have one.
And he's provided.
Okay, I figured it had to be. And then the facilities question, I'm just going to echo that second, that plus one, that like, what would be the kind of facilities needs? Do we need other sensory type opportunities, for all of our students? What would that look like? All of that kind of thing. How would we consider designing new buildings, any new buildings that we might be considering building somewhere along the lines, so that it takes into consideration sensory needs of all of our students and our staff for that matter too, so what would that look like? And using universal design principles in those designs as well too. So I just sort of throw that out there. The sample student schedules also very helpful to just sort of understand, for me at least, how that's all working. I have a couple of other questions, but I'm just gonna wait. So I know, are those people still there, Dr. Riley?
We actually have one of those that had a question in the Q&A also has their hand raised.
Okay.
So you can unmute them.
Okay, let's do that first. When you get unmuted, please state your name and where you live in the township.
First one is Sharon Marzocco.
Ms. Marzocco?
I can't unmute them, so I'm asking Keith Hardy, who's on the other side of.
Okay, I see it says talking up there.
I unmuted her. Ms. Marzocco, you can speak now.
Ms. Marzocco? All right. Is her question in the chat?
One of her questions is in the Q&A. So
Okay.
her first question was, how many ASD students are in general ed?
By any chance, did they say where in the Q&A were they? Okay. I wasn't saying it for the record.
Could you repeat that question?
Question is, how many ASD students are in gen ed?
Can I ask for clarity on that question on to what extent they're talking about?
There's percentages of kids that could be that.
Like based off LRE, like that's, I don't know what I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think if we were to answer it, we would need more clarity because it's way too broad.
I can move on to the other question.
Sure.
Cherie Pinckney did not give her location in the district either. Her question is it possible to resend the survey regarding the topics queried to the community?
Absolutely, absolutely. Obviously wouldn't impact this upcoming training on Monday, but absolutely can be reshared out to the entire community for the upcoming training as well.
And the same person asked, oh, I'm sorry, she did reply and said she's from Shelton.
Thank you.
The second question is, I know the sensory hallway was mentioned, but can you talk about the calm down room and what purpose this room serves for the students?
Okay, so calm down rooms typically acts as a space for de-escalation. If a student is in a level of escalated state, calm down rooms typically play the role of a space for a student to be able to de-escalate. That's answering the question.
Is that in all of the schools or just certain buildings?
More specifically, the principals would be able to identify like the designated areas that in some scenarios, it could be like dual for sensory and de-escalation. For some, there's separate rooms. For some cases, the de-escalation could occur in the classroom. So there isn't like a set, like every kid who's escalated has to go to a space. The de-escalation process could look different. It could be the counselor's office. So it could look different based off the scenario.
Is there a building where it's called the calm down room? That seems pretty specific. And this came up at a couple of other meetings, the Elkins Park sensory room. Is it open? Does it have one?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
I have one from the first one.
Okay. I think there was some issue when we first switched from MCIU to our programming. It had not been open because the MCIU took their materials with them, if you will. Any other?
I think we may be able to get Sharon back on now. Sharon Marzocco.
Hi, can you hear me now?
We can.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry about that. Sharon Marzocco, I live in Glenside, and I just had a comment. So I noticed that the board members, they all had multiple questions, and the supervisors, they all gave great answers, but they were kind of technical, and I could see it going over everybody's head. So I'm kind of recommending that the board, and I'm sorry to put more work on you, that you could have like a session where somebody comes and explains to you about special ed and IEPs and evaluations. And the Peel Center is, it's a group, it's funded by the state, and it's for parents related to special ed. And I know that SEEK, the parent group in the school district for special ed, I know that they've dealt with them a lot. And I think that would be a great group to reach out to maybe do a session with the board just to get deeper into the IEPs and the special ed process. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marzocco, for that suggestion. And I know we do have some audience members, so I'm gonna also just turn this over. Oh, there's one more. I'm sorry.
Well, we two more now.
Oh, two more. Okay.
Three people did respond about the content room, so that's what we call it.
Okay.
And we have another one, a raised hand from Nakara.
Nikira.
Here.
You guys can hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Hi,
we
yes,
can.
I'm Nikira Edwards. I live in Elkins Park. And I just wanted to speak. I am a mother of a child that is in the autism support program over at Wyncote. So all of this hits home for me. And I just wanted to speak on a few things that you guys spoke about tonight. A few things actually were already mentioned. Ms. Marzocco, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I really appreciate your comment. It seemed as if a lot of this meeting was spent just giving very basic education on ASD. And I feel like as a board, you guys should be a little bit further advanced on your knowledge of autism support. So I would really hope that everyone from tonight can just learn more about autism spectrum disorder, just to further educate you guys on what you're talking about. Because I feel like a lot of time was just spent on basic definitions. And I get it, everyone's life isn't affected by this, so you may not know, but it would be really beneficial if, I guess, more homework could be done prior to coming into these meetings, because I have kids and I did sit on the whole entire meeting and it seemed like that in part, or maybe if the community could go before the board, because sometimes I feel like for me, I only get on these meetings, I'm gonna be honest, when they affect me. So I know what, a BCBA is and things like that. I know those terms. So, I get it. Everyone doesn't have this impact their life personally. So you might not know the small things, but it would just be a little beneficial because again, it's running into bedtime and I spent a lot of time just hearing things that I've been dealing with since my kid was 2 years old. Another thing was about the calm down room over at Wyncote. I know that you spoke on it briefly, Ms. Jacqueline, but one of my biggest concerns have been with the transition has been that a lot of the behavior training seemed to not be up to par with where the MCIU was. I see a lot more negative reinforcement than positive reinforcement. For example, the calm down room, that was not something that was happening at all last year. And I have a kid who he's in the autism support program, but he's extremely intelligent. He's the type of kid that he can make the connection that if he does one thing and it makes him go to the calm down room, he'll just completely, he'll continue to do these actions to get sent to the calm down room because he may not want to do a preferred activity. I just don't think that that's beneficial at all to certain children that are in the autism support program. And also it's not mentioned on his IEP. And I know that's a more specific thing, so we don't have to talk specifically about that, but there's nothing on his, I think it's called PBSP goals or whatever, that says that at any point he's supposed to be removed from the classroom and put in this environment. And I think that goes across the board for a lot of the students over there at Wyncote because we all do talk. So if that's something that we're going to implement this year, I think that we should talk further into that. I didn't know anything about it until I started getting calls saying that he was in this calm down room. And once I seen the room, it looks like solitary confinement, just so that you guys know. It's nothing like that beautiful sensory hallway that y'all saw pictures of. It's literally a blank room, no pictures, no chairs, just a room with 4 walls. Another thing I wanted to ask about was the information on the least restrictive environment. I wanted to know what was that based off of? Because again, I was in a program last year and I'm in a program this year and I don't see much of a difference as far as my son being pulled out into different classroom and him being able to be, in his gen ed classrooms. He did last year with his regular ed class. He did, specials and lunch and recess. And this year it's the same thing. And the same where his teacher had in place last year is exactly what he's getting this year. So I don't really see where that information is coming from. And I think that's all my notes. I know that was a lot to put off on you, but I know that we're like over time. So I just wanted to just put it all out there and see whatever you guys, could pick up and just go from there. But, nothing has to be answered here. We do have those one-on-one meetings. I'm very familiar with some of the names. Dr. Scriven, this has been a thing. I've talked to you multiple times since last summer. So, you know, again, I'm open and I'm still hoping that, we can get to a point where the program to me is at the standards of what I, experienced last year. It is unfortunate that we feel like sometimes we have to be guinea pigs. I do appreciate in the beginning of the year, one second, babe. We spoke to you guys about needing more speech therapy, and that was something that happened really, really fast. I do want to applaud you guys on that, but I definitely think there's a far, long way to go to at least get where they were last year, because that program was awesome. And I know I can't speak it on it enough. Yes, babe, one second. You can eat some, go ahead. I can't speak on that program enough to, and I understand that changes had to be made, but I would just hope that before my son is out of Wynkoop, he can experience that same support that he had last year. So thank you guys.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. Thank you very much for calling in, Ms. Edwards, and for hanging in there with us. We appreciate it. We know it's been a long meeting. And thank you for your perspective as one board member. I really do appreciate it. It's your parental perspective.
Oh, I don't know how to mute myself again.
One more?
I'm sorry, that wasn't me. Oh, well,
No,
you're
all right.
welcome.
Yeah, we got it.
You're welcome. I just saw my name pop back up. I got a little nervous, but yeah, you're welcome. And I know, like I said, that was a lot, but I know that we're pressed for time, so I just wanted to get that all out there. But I thank you guys for listening. Miss Jackie, I'm working on your last name. I really, really am.
Okay, everyone calls me Miss G, so you're totally fine.
I'm sorry. I really am working on it. So I know that some of these things are things that we can speak on more of a one-on-one. And I know, I'll have like a small IEP meeting coming up, but these was just some concerns that I know, not just, me, we do all talk. We are even in communication with parents over at Meyer. So, we've all been supporting each other through this. And, I'm going to be the person that's going to speak for the group, because I know that this is like something that we're all kind of seeing and, just wanting the support on.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards.
You're welcome.
So we have Kristen from Elkins Park, that's her last name.
Kristen.
The sensory rooms at certain schools being completely empty seemed a little drastic. Do we have plans to make these rooms more welcoming?
Can we start off just by, you all know the conditions of the rooms. Can you start off by stating what's in the rooms, what's available, what's not, what has changed, what will change, so that we're all on the same page about what's available? Because it doesn't seem like we all have the same knowledge of what the rooms look like by school.
Yeah, so I can speak on Elkins Park since I oversee the program. So the room does have materials in it. I know there was a little bit of a lag at the beginning with a grant that was received for filling the room. And so sometimes there is a lag with that, getting the grant money to utilize in the appropriate way and whatnot in the right forms. So that room does have supplies in it for students to use, and the sensory space is open for all students to use. So it's not just a particular, especially, like I said, I could speak heavily on Elkins Park. All students have the opportunity to use that room. So it's not just a.
Can you expound upon what supplies are in the room?
Oh, okay. Different.
Paint us a picture.
Okay.
Make us feel like we're there.
Okay, so different flex seating options are in there. So there's bean bags. There is like a yoga ball, but it's like a peanut is the terminology for it, but it's like a yoga ball with like two parts to it. So there's that. They have like what looks like a gaming chair, like a rocking chair. And like I said, I'm trying to like make sure I explained it to best picture. So there's different flex seating. There's like a fuzzy seat, I don't know what's called, not a bench, but fuzzy seat in there as well. But then additionally, they have like a rack that has different sensory tools. We like to use tools versus sensory tools in there. So different fidgets, different things that kind of touch to different senses. So whether it is like a soft feel or like a rubbery feel with stretch, those are a lot of things that are inside that room right now.
Dr. Lane, can you? Sure.
So in like Cheltenham, for instance, they have a sensory hallway. That's what they have. And so similar, but in the hallway, they have things that explore the senses. They have things that they can touch. They have things that they can partially hear sounds. It is a wider hallway in regards to like visual stimulation. So the lighting is a little bit lower than it might be some of the other hallways.
At Cedar Brook, we have our sensory items are really in the classrooms. We do have a space for a rare circumstance when the student may need a space to decompress and keep themselves safe from, having other equipment or materials or things. But we don't, we try to do any sensory work within the classroom. At the high school, in our Skills for Life 3 classroom suite, we have an area of our classroom with some bean bags. We have some panels if you need some quiet privacy. And I should go back to Cedar Brook is very sectioned out in that classroom. So we have different areas in the room for that too.
That's something I can also speak on, like K-8 autistic support, is there's built-in sensory in the group, recognizing that's a need. And we collaborated with the occupational therapists who are very, have that knowledge in sensory areas to what material to put in the room. So we really collaborated with them at the beginning to determine like items that go into these spaces, and like I said, especially in the classroom where we recognize these kids have sensory needs.
Kristen did follow up and said, I'm speaking on the things I've seen while not seeing as recent as this week. Sorry for not clarifying.
Thank you, Kristen.
Can I just make a suggestion that, and this is for any community concern that is at a building level, I think it's fair to say that the best person or folks to reach out to would probably be the building principal to raise those concerns, because I think they're the most empowered to address them.
That's accurate.
Yeah. So that's not a criticism of raising it. It's great. I'm glad you're here, but I also want to make sure that you know the right place to go to get the problem solved.
Question from Cara.
Okay. Thank you.
Please visit Winco's Combat Room. It's a blank room. The sensory hallway is amazing. Low lighting kitchens.
Anything else out there, Dr. Riley?
Yes.
Oh, there's a
Cherie Pinkney.
Ms. Pinckney?
Hi, I'm sorry. This is Sheree and I'm from Cheltenham. So just to touch on the actual calm down room from Wyncote, because my child goes there pretty frequently, unfortunately. The calm down room essentially is just a room with a desk and some chairs. It might have some like coloring, materials or some writing materials or things like that, but there's nothing sensory friendly about the room. There's not low lighting, there's not, unless something changed since the last time I saw it. But it's just literally a room where a kid just goes and sits in and waits until, I guess, or talks to whomever they need to talk to get through the emotion, and they're sent back on their way. So I don't know if, we actually, we probably need to change that area and make it actually truly a sensory room and, to look like the sensory hallway. But right now it's just a blank, stale room.
So thank you for that. This is Dr. Scriven. What we will do is we will audit all of our sensory rooms within the district and come up with specified criteria to meet the needs of those respective students that it serves. So we hear the community loud and clear. I'm not going to go school for school in this forum, but we will follow up and have updates accordingly. So thank you for the comments.
Thank you, Ms. Pinckney. Was there anything else? Okay, thank you, Dr. Riley. I'm afraid to look back over you. I do, Dr. Riley. Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions here? Rebecca? Ms. Condit.
I'm Rebecca Condit. I live in Elkins Park. So I had a question actually going all the way back to when Dr. Smith was talking about revising or choosing a different screener to help with disproportionality and the gifted program. I know it's a little bit different for special education because there are so many different screeners used because of the variety of different kinds of disabilities that kids have. But have we evaluated all of the screeners that we use for special ed to make sure that we're using the ones that are the sort of best practice in terms of limiting racial disproportionality?
So some of, and gifted has an element of this too, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think there are some, like when a psychologist does a evaluation, for example, sometimes there are some subjectivity that goes into those evaluations, so you can't completely stay away from that. So our way of dealing with that is to make sure, as we spoke of earlier, that we make sure all of our staff and those who are conducting the evaluations understand our commitment to equity, our commitment to making sure that we give fair, we draw fair conclusions from data that we collect from evaluation. So in terms of the gifted, I use that for an example because we did have, I can't think of her name, somebody may remember from Vanderbilt University, we had Dr. Ford, who is the authority on gifted education, come in and say, what you're using is not effective for what you're trying to do, and name something for us to use. To your point, special education is a little more complicated and has more margins of error in terms of saying, this is it, this is the one. It's not as cut and dry.
And I'm thinking, even for some, and I just know this as a parent, not an expert at all, but even for sometimes for the same kind of diagnosis, there might be 3 or 4 different kinds of screeners. And some of them are like checklists for parents and teachers where they give this, you check off, does the child do this always, sometimes, never, blah, 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 or they're like, pick the one of these 5 things that most identify with your child or whatever. And I think just for my own kids, I've sometimes done 3 different screeners for the same, kind of issue. And I see the wording varies so much. And then I wonder, I feel like there must be implications to that. And so there must be research out there that says like, what are the better ones to use? And I don't know if our district has done that or not, because not all of these analysis I'm talking about have happened here in Cheltenham. Some of them have been private things, but it's something I feel like we should probably look into if we haven't.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Conde, for that question. That was actually, I had psycho evaluations written down on my pad here as well, because I remember meeting a school psychologist, a Black man, at a conference at Temple, who had done a lot of this work on what were culturally appropriate evaluation tools and how to use them, especially for Black boys. That was his focus. And so I definitely think that there is, for sure, things we could probably benefit from. I mean, this is another issue personally that I, as one board member and one community member, have been very concerned about for a long time. Is the quality of our school psychological evaluations, our in-house school psychological evaluations. I know so many parents who have paid for independent evaluations because the evaluations that our district has done have just not quite been what they needed to get the information about the child. So I think the question you raise is really, really important. And so thank you for raising it. Anybody else? Mr. Riley?
No question.
Thank you. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for your time, for all the time you put into creating this presentation as well, and for being here and for answering all of our questions. Thank you very much. And thank you for my fellow board members for asking such thoughtful questions as well. So I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
Ms. Long, before you do a motion, I do want to bring one thing to the attention of the board. I too appreciate all of the questions. I do understand that special ed has been something that has been on the radar of the board. I do want to identify that Dr. Brown Beasley is in her first year here at Cheltenham. Ms. D is in her first year here at Cheltenham. Dr. Lank is in her first year here at Cheltenham. No, Evans is in his second week. I just felt it was necessary to put that in perspective. This is going to be an ongoing process. I appreciate the partnership. I appreciate the questions from the parent and the community. We are not going to resolve this overnight because it didn't happen overnight. So some of these pent up frustrations that I sense when we come to these meetings, I think we really need to put them in perspective, which is why I wanted to point out who was sitting in the room, so that we don't lose sight of where we are as a district in terms of who's at the table. Their efforts have been incredible, and you can ask the support of any of our principals. I just need that to be honored as we continue to drive special ed forward. So just wanted to put that out there because I kind of feel some kind of way right now. Okay.
As that So anybody, before I ask for motion to adjourn?
Yeah, before we move forward.
I was just trying to say, so moved.
Before motion, that's like a drop the mic moment. Dr. Tripp, so I barely want to follow it, but I read an article today that talked about so like 250,000 students who are no longer in school after the pandemic, right? As a way of a transition, like never came back. And tonight we're having a conversation about, as Charles, Mr. Burdell Williams alluded to a little earlier, we're having a conversation about like families who are choosing to come back, right? Families, obviously, like they're not being lost in this transition. So that is something different to commend, and I appreciate, definitely wanted to end the meeting with appreciation for our administration, and thank you, Jenny, for doing that as well.
Thank you.
And I'll make a motion.
Okay, do I have a second? I assume from Ms. Henry or something. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.